Hello, everyone, and welcome to Out with the Boids, my presentation on Boids and flocking behaviors. So, first off, what are Boids? Boids were created in 1986 by Craig Reynolds. They're a relatively simple flocking algorithm with some surprisingly complex emergent behaviors that mimic the flocking behavior of real-life animals such as birds, fish, herding mammals, but it could also be used to showcase things like fluid dynamics. So how do Boids work? So Boids operate off of steering behaviors. Each Boid has a direction that it's moving in, and it uses steering behaviors to influence the direction that it tries to move towards. So there are three important parts of a steering behavior: the direction the Boid is moving, the direction the Boid should move, and the force that's applied to the Boid to basically rotate it towards its target position. And a combination of multiple steering forces is what creates the emergent behavior that Boids showcase. So Boids have three different distinct steering behaviors. The first one being alignment. So each Boid attempts to have roughly the same heading as Boids around it. As you can see in this diagram, it's looking at the Boids in its range of vision and attempting to rotate itself in so that it's facing the same direction that they are. So that's this behavior will make it so that all the Boids generally go in the same direction. Behavior number two is cohesion. So each Boid attempts to move towards the center of mass of Boids around it. As you can see here, it's looking at these three Boids, finds their center position, and tries to steer towards that location. This behavior means that Boids generally stick together rather than splitting apart. And then following this is behavior three, separation. Each Boid attempts to move away from Boids that are too close to it. So it finds the direction it would need to go to get away from all of the Boids that are too close to it. Those are represented by these Boids in the inner ring here in this diagram. It averages those directions and then moves that way. So with this behavior, it will stick with Boids that it can see, but it will try not to be too close to other Boids, meaning they won't crowd together too much. Now, there is another aspect that I actually don't see talked about a whole lot in regards to Boids, which is their vision ranges. They play a very important part in the emergent behavior of Boids. There are two important ranges, the outer vision range and the inner range that I call the personal bubble. Within the personal bubble, those Boids are only taken into account by separation. So Boids that are too close are not taken into account in alignment or cohesion, and then only Boids that are in that outer ring outside of the bubble but within the vision range are what the Boid tries to align and cohere to. And these two ranges can change the behavior, especially if you do something like reduce the personal bubble to 0, then it will not try to separate at all, and you can get sort of interesting behaviors that come up, stuff like that. So now, given that information, I will show the demo. All right, welcome to the demo. So here is my default. This is just a number of Boids flying around having a good time. They have an average amount of alignment, cohesion, and separation, and a pretty sizable vision range and separation range. Here you can see the three steering behaviors in action, as well as another one which steers them away from the edge of the screen when they get too close to it. But you can see how they all sort of follow the same kind of direction. They all sort of try and stay in one group without splitting up too much, but they also try not to get too crowded together. Although you can see how some do sort of get crowded together in the middle of the group there, because they're sort of surrounded on all sides and they don't really know what way to go. But if they were given a little more space to move, they will spread out. So yeah, this is a pretty good showcase of the three sort of operating in tandem. Let me reset this just so you can see them sort of like get into position again. Here you go. You can see how they sort of coalesce over time. The vision range here is pretty big, so it doesn't take that long for Boids to get sucked into the larger group. But if I switch to this scene, this same parameters, but on a much larger scale, you can see there's lots of Boids. I'll let it run for a minute here. But you'll see after a minute they sort of coalesce into a few groups, and this one is pretty stable in this sort of configuration that you see right now. So there's a lot of different flocks, but they're all different. There's a few loners that kind of run around. You'll see that the loners occasionally get picked up by a larger flock, and then if two flocks crash into each other, some will sort of get launched off. So this is pretty stable right here. And this you can see a lot of different flocks interacting with each other. This is the vision range of these guys if you're interested. It's a similar ratio to what it was in the previous one. They're just all a lot smaller, so we can fit more of them on the screen. Now I'll show off some of these in isolation. So here we have a scene where all of the Boids are only aligned. They don't care about cohesion or separation at all. So you'll see that they sort of move very robotically. They don't particularly care how far away from each other they are as long as they're able to see and continue aligning. So after a while, after they go through a few sort of bumps into the wall, they'll sort of get pushed closer and closer together. But you can see here this very robotic movement that happens because there's no cohesion and separation happening. If we switch to a purely cohesive scene, you'll see that the Boids all sort of gather into little swarms. This is because they don't care about how close they are to other Boids or keeping the same direction. So they just sort of huddle around these sort of localized centers of mass, which creates sort of a swarming effect like piranhas or bees might showcase. Here's one that sort of got ejected that's flying around. He will probably get picked up by this, right there, and sort of go back into... And this scene, they sort of localize in different places, but you'll see they usually congregate into two on each half of the screen. And lastly, we'll have purely separated. This is just sort of a chaotic mess. They'll never congregate in any way because they're always sort of trying to be in different places from each other. So this just sort of is chaotic. This is a good showcase of what it might look like if you had a school of fish or birds and like predators showed up, they would scatter in this way. Now I'll show you a slightly more complex one that I like a lot. Here, let me increase the scale of these a little bit so you can see them just a bit better. This one has a lot of cohesion and separation, but very low alignment, which means that they do congregate into these swarms. The low alignment does create swarms, but they don't particularly stick together. And the cohesion and separation in combination with this vision range, they cohere very strongly on the outside into the middle, which creates a strong inward force. And then when they get into this personal bubble, they separate very strongly, which creates a strong outward force, which sort of makes these sort of like undulating swarming effect that you see here. Now this I think is a very good showcase of what an attacking swarm might look like. Not a flock, but a swarm. So I mentioned piranhas or bees from before. This is exactly what I think it would look like if you were being chased by some attacking, swarming predator like that. Just let this run for a minute. Yeah. So there you go. That's a pretty good showcase of the different sort of aspects of Boids and the way that they work, and their sort of interesting and sort of fascinating behavior. All of this, by the way, is very easily transported into 3D, but 2D is fairly simple to implement and is a lot easier to sort of see and understand what's happening, especially on a screen. It comes across pretty well. You can see a lot of the movement and sort of decisions that the Boids are making on the fly. So yeah, I'll go back to the presentation here. So how can this kind of thing be applied? So I went into this a little bit during the demo showcase, but the interesting and surprisingly complex flocking behaviors can be used for lots of stuff. Specifically, it can be used in any game that includes enemies or creatures that move in groups. This top image is from Thronefall, where there's armies of enemies that approach, and you're sort of trying to defend your castle from them. On the bottom is Subnautica, where there are schools of fish that you can find. I'm not certain that these used Boids, but Boids would be very good in these sort of circumstances. And because of the way that the various functions are applied, and you can weight them differently, it's very easy to interject other functions into the algorithm. So alongside of your alignment, cohesion, and separation, you can interject a function for following points of interest, create preset movement patterns, create attack formations when in an attacking state, for example, and you can change the values of each of the you can change the weights of each of these functions on the fly in response to changing states of your enemies fairly easily. But there are, of course, limitations. The main limitation of Boids is processing power, as each Boid needs to be constantly assessing the Boids around it and performing not particularly complex, but a fairly large amount of calculations, which can get fairly processing intensive if you have more than a few Boids or several flocks sort of interacting with each other. In the demo, the most I had in any single scene was about 100, and if you put in any more, at least in my implementation, it starts to stutter pretty aggressively. And although that can be limited and sort of worked around, you can increase the efficiency of the program. Mine isn't especially high. You do need to keep in mind that you can't do hundreds and hundreds of Boids at once, or it'll start to get sort of overwhelming. But yeah, there you go. That's my overview of Boids, how they work, and some of the potential applications that you could use when adding them to a game. So yeah, thank you for your time.